Welcome to Backyard Cigars. The last time that we talked about the Cohiba brand, we got into a lot of the legal issues that were surrounding the brand name. And in the middle of talking about their history, I was smoking this cigar, which I stated was a Cohiba from General Cigars from 1981. And this is what George and I, the owner of Vintage Cigar Store, uh, he and I had both, agreed that this is what it was. He had done a little research himself, and that much he knew, or so he believed, and so did I believe. But then he posed the question of, man, wouldn't it be great to get a hold of the trademarks and see what that language looks like? And I managed to get something to that extent, and I noticed something right away, but I was busy working on something else, and George kind of jumped right into it and started to realize that this cigar was not a General Cigar brand, Cohiba, but it was instead a Cohiba cigar made by another usurper company, uh, a company out of New York, GDM Enterprises or something like that. They dealt with some Dominican farm, and they started making these cigars, bringing them in unbanded and banding them in New York City and distributing them, along with a lot of confusing letters that were handed to the dealers and anyone who was purchasing these cigars. So essentially, they were uh, a cigar line that was called Cohiba, but it has nothing to do with the Cohiba from Cuba or from General Cigars' version of Cohiba. Now, General Cigars took them to court, and when they got to court, there was a lot of wrangling. There was a lot of referencing of past cases like Polaroid versus Polaroid Technologies or something like that, and there was a belief by General Cigar that was put out, a statement indicating that these were inferior to the quality of their Cohibas. Now, mind you, their Cohibas hadn't been out for quite some time because they had taken a pause after the early 80s, after bad sales in the early 80s. So this company swooped in around, I would say, somewhere between 91 and 95 and made these cigars just as General Cigar was slowly reintroducing the Cohiba Red Dot. Now, this is a Cohiba Red Dot Tubo, which we'll get to in a minute. But so this cigar is indeed extremely rare because it's an example of American greed, as George and I discussed it. It was very much a lot of different ethic questions posed as to what's legal, what's not legal. Yeah, there are legal loopholes and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and a general consensus is that this will not be settled anytime in the near future because right now, as we speak, General Cigar is appealing the decision to, and they're not required to suspend their sale and distribution of the Cohiba lines that they have in existence. They can keep those going as long as this appeal is on, and this will take some time. It could be many, many more years before something is decided and something solid. But right now, in looking at this particular brand, General Cigars put out a statement in regards to the inferiority of this product and how it would damage their sales and their brand reputation and create confusion for the brand. Not that there wasn't enough of it already, right? With the whole situation with Cuba. I mean, they're in the courts with Cuba, and now they're in the courts with another company, American company. It's teamed up with I forget another company, and they had formed this tobacco business. General Cigar said, "Look, example number one, the way that GDM having their rollers roll the cigars in the Dominican Republic was using the booking method. Now, I'm not an expert roller, but I did a little look up, and the booking method is now commonly the most efficient and normal way of rolling a cigar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I read. That it is, but back then in the 1990s, General Cigar was putting out a statement saying that this rolling method did not allow the cigar to burn as evenly and smoothly, and that it was evidence of its inferiority. Now, GDM did not rebuff that. They didn't make a comment in regards to that. They left it as is. But as we know now in present day, the booking method, nothing wrong with it. If you got good rollers, they're going to do a good job. Plain and simple. So that's what I wanted to say about this cigar, which was not a General Cigar, Cohiba. And then to get to the red dot, which is what I'm going to be smoking today. The red dot was introduced with new packaging and so forth in the early 90s, but it was reintroduced from the original Cohibas that General Cigar, of course, had sold in the 80s. So this cigar is, look, it isn't a cheap cigar. I was able to get it for about, I would say, $20, and there you go. It's in the tubo. Total size 6x50. And one of the things that I'm looking at now, and just looking at the wrapper, it looks so well done. The feel of the cigar, very solid. Doesn't feel overpacked. They take great care of this line. They really do. This is a Colorado Cameroon wrapper, an Indonesian binder, and Dominican Piloto Cubano from the Dominican Republic that is used in here. Age of each item, I do not know. But knowing General Cigar and their practice of aging wrappers, minimum 2-3 years, I would say probably the same for binders. And when it comes to the filler, who knows? It could be some old makeup of older filler in here. We don't know what the vintage is. We're not aware. But as you can see, the difference there with the dot in the O, and that was supposed to be another thing to distinguish them and to separate them from any kind of confusion with the Cuban Cohibas. I know a lot of people that are saying to me right now, there's no way in hell that I would pay $20 to smoke a General Cigar fake Cohiba when I can just go and buy a real Cuban Cohiba. Well, then maybe you live in Canada, or maybe you live in Spain. But if you live in the United States, you can deal with the gray market and the issues that that brings, or you can just not really smoke as many Cubans as you may like to. Because even as the urge you might have to smoke Cuban cigars, sometimes price, length of time and shipping wise, and things like that. It's some of us have contacts and ways of getting around that, so we don't have an issue of getting Cuban cigars in the United States necessarily, but it isn't the easiest of things, right? And then you have to also concern yourselves with the source of the cigars, because the authenticity and so forth. Then you got to start looking with your ultraviolet light at the holograms and so forth, and going through that to be extra sure. Because if you're paying that much money for your Cuban cigars, then I think you should be extra sure that they're real. And this Cohiba is real. It is. It is a real cigar. It is sort of at the moment a legal cigar, right? It's got that history of legal wrangling behind it, But it's many times it has been scored a very high scoring cigar. 90 plus, I've heard 90, 91, 92. Numbers like that have been thrown around. Personally, I've never smoked a Cohiba Red Dot. I've smoked all of them, uh, well, most of them, except the Cohiba Red Dot. And if yeah, no, I never smoked one of these. So this will be first time for me, and you'll get to see what I think of this quality. So looking in the tubo, I can see that the tubo is cedar lined, and I can only imagine if you were to try and age, then you could leave it in the tubo, see how that comes out, see how that works. And here we have a Cohiba Blue and a Cohiba Black, Churchill. And I've smoked these before, and they're very good, very good. Particularly the Cohiba Black, I think is a fine cigar. And so far, I'm experiencing good things with this cigar. The draw is really good. The aroma is good. The general flavors that I'm getting early on are pleasing. I don't want to hone in on them just yet, but I'll share as I go along. Uh, we can't ignore the fact that a lot of people, perhaps many of them outside of the United States, think of this cigar as a fake Cohiba. We can't ignore that. You have people that are going to feel very strongly about that. There's a connection to, you know, a pride in your country, right? So certain particular brands are part of the culture, and Cohiba has been such a big part of Cuban cigars, and it hasn't been the biggest necessarily, but maybe it is. Yeah, maybe it is because it changed the game. So perhaps what I meant to say was that their history isn't just Cohiba, right? Cohiba's fairly young, born in the 1960s. So uh, it's not as if this is the legacy of Cuban cigars. It's not. But it is a gem within the portfolio of Cuban cigar brands and that Cuba Tabaco uh, manages. And you're just going to have strong feelings where people really think to themselves, that is fraud, that's fraudulent, that is, you know, infringing on trademark. I mean, again, we can go through the legal wrangling. I'm not a lawyer, so I would fail and lose the case. But this is going to be played out, and like right now, as we speak right now, and I read this article from the Intellectual Property Rights of International Trade in Cuban Products, written by Joseph M. Perry, Louis A. Woods, and Stephen Shapiro. And Table 1 lists Cuban cigar brands produced in other countries as of 1998. Belinda, U.S. rights owned by General Cigars, made in Honduras. Bolivar, U.S. rights owned by General Cigar, made in the Dominican Republic. Let's go right to it. Cohiba, General Cigar, Dominican Republic. You got El Rey del Mundo, Fonseca, H. Upman, Henry Clay, Hoyo de Monterrey, La Gloria, Montecristo, Partagas, Porlanga, Punch, Jamón, Romeo Julieta, St. Louis Grey, and Santa Damina, and Cifuentes, and a host of others. You get the idea. I went on a little too long. But one thing that I can notice from this list is that the majority of these brands are owned by either General Cigar or Consolidated Cigar. And then you got two or three other companies that have a couple of the brands. The majority of these brands are being made in the Dominican Republic. There's one that's still being made in Jamaica and in the United States. There's a few in Honduras, but the majority here is the Dominican Republic. And they sourced this from Cigar Aficionado, July 20th, 1998. So that, I mean, look, all of these Cuban brands are being made elsewhere with different tobacco. Are these General Cigar Cohibas ever going to live up to the legacy that the Cuban Cohiba has? I sincerely doubt it. I don't think that'll ever happen. I just don't. That's if they can even continue using and selling this line. Eventually, one day, someone's going to decide, and we'll find out. But in terms of quality alone, these are very good cigars. But you get a good Cohiba, obviously, even especially if you age one. An aged Cohiba is incredible. These are Dominican tobacco. You know how I feel about that. I don't think all. I'm not saying all Dominican tobacco doesn't age well. I'm saying a lot of the Dominican tobacco that I've dealt with, that I've had, my cigars, has not aged as well as I would have liked. In some cases, it was okay. In other cases, it was like, kind of like the fresh better, or maybe especially with the Dominican tobaccos, I tend to, if I am even going to age them, a year, and then go from there, because I think at a year you're still pretty safe. Not much, some light sweetness coming in, and I'm just waiting for it to really develop a little bit more, so that way we can talk a little bit more about the flavors. Nice chewy smoke, really good aroma. In the beginning, the first third, I was getting a lot of that cocoa sweetness, mild cocoa sweetness with a hint of spices. And as it developed into the second, uh, third, I felt that, I don't know, it was a little sharp, bitter note, almost like a charred leather. And accompanying that, I got some minor pepper and spices, along with a little bit of cocoa note, right? So that was what it was really, what I was experiencing with the cigar. And now, even now, it's more or less what I'm still getting. It doesn't taste bad. It doesn't blow me away. It's you've got a solid cigar in regards to the blend. It's not bad, but I feel that how it's priced might have a lot of people think a little bit more about it, because let's look at it this way. Regardless of what a cigar costs, if it's good, it's good. If it's great, it's great. But sometimes you get a hold of a cigar, and I think you guys know this already. You get a hold of a cigar, and you pay $20 for it, let's say, and you feel a little cheated, because you feel that, hey, I smoked a $15 cigar yesterday. It was twice as good and just more impressive. And you'll even find cigars like that in the $10 to $12 range. If you look hard, you'll find them. Uh, this at $22.95, what it's priced, is pretty high, and I think a little. Let's face it, here they're trading off the name, because you think of Cohiba, you think of something expensive, at least in most cases for a lot of Americans. You think of a Cohiba, you think of, that's got to be an expensive Cuban cigar to obtain, and quite certainly, yes, there are some Cuban Cohibas that are very expensive, and on the norm, they're not cheap. But you run into this, and you've got the Cameroon wrapper, so I get that. Cameroon wrapper is going to add to the cost, because it's probably the most expensive wrapper tobacco that you can buy in the world. Probably. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's expensive, and it drives up the cost. Indonesian binder, fillers, I mean, that I don't think you're going to have a big problem with. But when we want to talk about the construction, I pat it down, it felt really good. But after the first third, I felt like I had to poke it. It was just a very conservative draw. I didn't feel plugged or anything, but I just felt like it was holding back, and it really was packed with just a little bit too much tobacco for my taste. And I gave it a little poke, and it improved it, but I still don't feel that draw is where it needs to be. It's certainly improved and certainly acceptable at this point in time, and I'm not going to complain about it anymore because I feel like it has kind of resolved itself. But going back to the overall flavor profile, I mean, medium bodied cigar, some cedar hints, some cocoa sweetness here and there, a little bit of bitter leather notes, charred leather, and some spices, but really nothing else. Well, you're just saying, you just mentioned a bunch of things. I mean, what more could you want? I mean, I think it's just okay. It's an okay blend. I personally prefer the black better, much more than this one. But I just can't see myself ever paying more than $15 for a cigar this, like this specific cigar. I wouldn't. And in contrast, the Cohiba Blue is, I believe, $12.50, and I know that there's Cohiba Nicaragua, and I know that those are different cigars. I mean, by General Cigars, but in being from Nicaragua, they're gonna offer a different profile, obviously. And I appreciate Dominican tobacco. I really do. I appreciate it. I really look forward to smoking it when I do smoke it. Uh, but right now, I'm not feeling overly excited here. uh, burn burn line's been pretty good. Just dropped the ash right now, but burn line's been pretty good. It's been holding up pretty good. I'm gonna smoke the cigar just a bit more. Come back with my final notes. Come back to wrap this up, folks. It's a decent cigar. I'm really not blown away by it. I think it's, the draw was a little too conservative for me, and overall the flavor notes, with some light cocoa notes, light spice, little bit of cedar hint, and a little bit of a charred leather in the finish as well. Slight bitter note there every now and then. That I didn't like. And in charging $23 for this cigar, you're gonna have some people that are gonna really say, "Hey, you know what? Will the real Cohiba please stand up?" Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Till next time, Backyard Cigars.